Zoning Board of Appeals hearing on petition number 21P1563, excuse me, VSW DevCo LLC's latest petition for a special use permit to repower an existing WIX development in portions of East Grove and May Townships here in Lee County. In case you're trying to get on Zoom but have lost the information, the Zoom meeting ID is 915-3923-9154. And the password, if you need it, is 209840. If you want to watch us and listen to us on YouTube, on your computer or cell phone, use your browser, go to www.youtube.com. In the search bar, type Lee County IL, short for Illinois, Zoning Board of Appeals. No need to be concerned with upper or lowercase letters. Find the session date you want, presumably tonight, May 17th, and voila, you should see us. If you need technical assistance with any of that, you may feel free to call D. Duffy's hotline, 815-973-3449. I note, honoring us with their presence tonight, are the chair of the ZBA, Mr. Forster. Mr. Bothey is present, Mr. Pat's present, Mr. Hughes is present, Mr. Myers present. Representing the petitioner, Mr. Stryker is present with, okay, counted 5 representatives of his client. The Honorable D. Duffy is present, as is her assistant, Ms. Henkel. Court reporter is present. Himself, of course, is present. That makes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 bodies. Oh, Mr. Boonstra, the Honorable State's Attorney, is present. That makes 16 bodies in the courtroom, well below the IDPH mitigation protocol of 50 in this room. I understand there are no interested parties in this room or in the rear former jury deliberation room. And I'm informed by Alice that there is one interested party joining us on Zoom. I'm sorry. And they're gone. Okay. So we have total 16 people in the hearing room and no interested parties. At least the presence. Let me know if somebody shows up. All right. When we left off, Mr. Stryker, you were in the midst of presenting your evidence, and you may continue.
I'd like to call Andrew
Mr. DePass, if you'll step up somewhere and raise your right hand, anywhere is fine with me. Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Have a seat right above our wonderful court reporter. And
is this going to be projected, or everyone's got a copy?
All the DBA members have a copy, and it will be projected as well as that.
Okay.
Now that you've been sworn in, could you please state your name and spell for the record?
Richard Andrew DePass.
would you spell your last name for us?
DEPASS.
I figured, but want to make sure. Okay.
2925 Richmond Avenue, 11th floor, Houston, Texas.
And how are you currently employed?
I'm employed by VTHO, Inc. I am the head of renewables, responsible for our investment program around renewable energy and alternative energy as well.
And how long have you held that?
Since May 1st, 2018.
And how are you employed before that time?
Prior, I was the global CEO of a solar company called Conergy that had operations in 14 different countries. And prior to that, most of my career was in private equity at Citi with a focus on sustainable development investing.
So I take it you have a fair amount of experience in the renewable energy industry?
Yes, yes.
Approximately how many years?
I have been in this sector since 2006.
Have you ever overseen the development of any renewable project, or has it all been on investment side?
Yeah, no, so when I was the global CEO of Conergy, we had developed and built over 2 gigawatts of solar, primarily, and then over my career as an investor in all sectors of renewable energy, solar, wind, and others.
Okay, great. If you could, one last introductory question. If you could tell the board members what your educational background is.
Yes, I went to the University of Western Ontario Business School and graduated in 1989, and then moved to New York. And I also have a CFA.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 13. You can take a look at it.
Well, you're the only one with any markings on it, so. Mine doesn't have any markings. I want to compare. I want to make sure I get the right one. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Great.
Excuse me for interrupting while he's looking. And you marked that one? Thank you.
Sir, have you seen it before?
Yes.
Can you describe to the board members what it is?
It's an overview of VTHO, who we are and what we do, and some key points about the Big Sky Wind repowering project. Yes.
This time, why don't I turn it over to you to take the board member through your position?
Sure.
Through your presentation, you may follow up some questions after.
Okay, perfect. So VTHO, we're the world's largest independent energy trader. So our company was founded in Rotterdam in 1966. Our core business is the physical and financial trading of energy commodities. So that's crude, liquefied natural gas, biofuels. We also are one of the biggest traders of power in the United States and other countries, as well as environmental commodities, such as renewable energy credits, solar, renewable energy credits, and carbon. Specifically, we've traded typically over 1,000 terawatt hours of power annually, which is a lot. Just with regards to our financial performance, our revenue in 2020 was $140 billion. We've had 54 consecutive years of profitability, never losing money in a year, knock on wood. Investment grade credit rating from 2 agencies, and strong liquidity in conservative management of risk. The company is actually privately owned by the employees, with no one employee owning more than 5% of the company. We have 1,400 employees in around 40 offices. With regards to investments, we have a long track record of investing in physical assets and infrastructure, taking advantage of secular trends in the commodities markets, and now the whole energy transition, which is a very important topic for all companies, including oil and gas companies such as ourselves. Our current investments in renewables in the Americas are about $1 billion. We have invested multiple billions, close to 8, in various different other types of businesses that are core to our trading activities. If we can turn to page 3. So we're a global leader in energy distribution. So what that means is that we physically move crude oil and other products around the world on the sea. We're the largest physical mover of crude oil in the world. Any one time, about 20% of all the crude that's moving in the oceans is controlled by us. We have refining operations, terminals to store the commodity, retail distribution, which means gas stations in different geographies, Africa, Australia, and Europe. We're also moving into what is a cleaner source of energy in addition to renewables, which is gas and liquefied natural gas. I mentioned the power trading, and then we do have some upstream oil and gas businesses. So this is just a pictorial overview of our energy business and assets. Now, if we turn to page 4, it gets a bit cleaner. Our renewables footprint. So we have a global reach and we're growing into new geographies. I won't go through all of these, but just to give you an idea, in the US, and I'll speak to this, we have a portfolio of about 700 megawatts operational or under construction. Important to note that we just moved into renewables in the last 2 years when I joined. So we think we've accomplished a lot in short order. In addition to solar and wind, we also have launched electric vehicle fleet business. This is to convert municipal buses, school buses, and others to electric. We have battery storage investments in the UK. We have some hydrogen projects in the UK, biofuels, and then a big energy hub in Australia. And we've started to build solar of significant size in India. Perhaps more relevant to our audience here, well, is page 5. Voting board rather. Renewable power generation in the US. I mentioned the 700 megawatts. We intend to grow this portfolio to multiple gigawatts in the next couple of years. Our team does have a lot of experience in solar primarily, but we also work with close partners such as Excess, Mike, who you heard from in testimony last session, who are true experts in onshore wind development and construction oversight. So we have a couple of very large projects that are under construction or to be under construction. We have solar and storage in California, large projects, 106 megawatts in Pennsylvania and 102 in Maryland. And of course, the 240 megawatt wind repowering project here in Lee and Bureau County, if approved by the county supervisors. There's some advantages to consider with regards to VTHO as an owner of renewables. We have a significant capital base, which means ease and speed of execution with no need to raise construction debt or other forms of tax equity to monetize the tax credits. We have development capital through the long-term ownership. So our objective is to be a long-term owner of assets. Also, as one of the largest power traders and environmental commodity traders in the US, we have a deep understanding of the relevant power markets. In addition to solar, wind repowering is a key area of growth focus for VTHO, working with our operating partner, Excess. If we turn to page 6, with regards to the specific project for discussion, Big Sky Wind here in Lee in Bureau County. We intend to invest over $250 million to repower the entire wind farm with more efficient and reliable turbines. So VTHO acquired the Big Sky Wind Farm from BlackRock on April 15th, 2021, so this year. Subject to county and other approvals, the repowering project is targeted to commence in June of this year, so in short order. The repowering project will be complete by third quarter 2022, fourth quarter latest. It will increase the production from the existing wind farm by 60%, or over 325,000 megawatt hours per year. We'll be using top tier technology, Vestas wind turbines that are manufactured here in the United States in their Colorado operation. I mentioned before, and I think this is relevant, is that VTHO is a strong sponsor. We have investment grade credit rating, significant capital base revenue, large power trader, and a significant commitment to renewable energy. We are providing the funds for the entire project from our own capital, be it the construction and/or we're able to use the tax credit. We're not relying on third-party financing. This is very important because you know the project is going to get built. We already have significant capital invested in the project to secure the turbines. And of course, we purchased the project from BlackRock to repower because in its current state, it's not very efficient. The major milestones that have been achieved, we have our turbine supply agreement and service management agreement executed with Vestas. The engineering, procurement, and construction contract for the balance of the plant is to be signed at the end of this month, so in short order. Our road use agreements are completed, and we have scheduled the zoning board of appeals meetings for Lee and Bureau County, and of course the Lee meetings are underway now. Experienced team. So in addition to VTHO, I mentioned Excess Management, who will be our development, construction oversight, and asset manager. They have developed and operated multiple gigawatts of wind in the United States and are true pioneers in onshore wind development and construction. The power that's generated, we expect to be sold to commercial and industrial customers. We're in discussions with a number of users of significant quantities of power for data centers and otherwise. And finally, VTOL is committed to the ownership of this project, but we're also committed to be part of the community and as helpful and involved as we can be in Lee County and Bureau County. Page 7 is a more detailed overview of the project. The location we know, Bureau and Lee counties. In ComEd, locational delivery. The capacity, 240 megawatts, that number is not changing. The wind farm has been in operation since 2011, and the repowering will be complete before the end of 2022, with it commencing hopefully in June. Importantly, how we refer to the efficiency of a wind farm is the net capacity factor. The net capacity factor prior to repowering was only 25.7%. Post repowering, it's 42% because the Vestas wind turbines are much more efficient as the technology has advanced. Previously, we have the Suzlon wind turbines. Now we'll have Vestas, about 104 V120s, 2.2 megawatt, and 5 Vestas V110s. The capital stack is entirely from VTOL, land leases up to 45 years with a number of landowners within this county. And the operations and maintenance provider right now is a company called Renew. They will be replaced by Vestas in a matter of, I believe, 60 days. And Vestas will provide a 20-year full service contract for their turbines. And the asset manager, balance of plant, power management is Excess Management Partners. I think on the next page, just a little pictorial, which hopefully you've seen already. We're replacing 114 turbines with 109, so 5 will be decommissioned. Capacity stays the same. We use the existing towers, but replace the nacelle, hub blades, and electrical internals. There will be no, what's it called? The towers will not be replaced, and there will not be anything just dropping to the ground. Cranes will be used for the replacement of the nacelles and the blades, which together are called turbines. There'll be an addition of a small adapter between the existing tower and the new nacelle. And all manufacturing structures of the tower will be reused: platforms, ladders, cables, trays, etc. That is everything that is in Exhibit 13.
I had a couple questions that came to mind as you were presenting. One thing that struck me is that VTHO has only been in the renewable business in America for 2 years, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. And it looked like from your current portfolio, Big Sky is your significant wind project, correct?
Yes.
This really is an absolute high priority.
Oh, it's an absolute high priority for VTOL in the Americas and also from our board. It's an important initiative.
And And one issue or question we talked about with Mike Spearschneider, who you mentioned, was currently, am I correct to say that the power from this project is sold into the market?
Right now, the power is sold into the wholesale market. We refer that to merchant.
And currently, the project will continue to sell merchant up to or less or until a specific power purchase agreement is entered into with the industrial commercial.
Yes, so the plant will continue to be merchant. That is sold into the PJM wholesale market. Primarily benchmark is NIHub or Northern Illinois Hub. And post repowering, we expect to be contracting a power purchase agreement with commercial industrial types, likely technology or other companies that are purchasing significant quantities. The C&I market is very robust to purchase renewable energy, with many companies, large and medium size, seeking to go net zero, which is to reduce their carbon emissions.
That's, in one slide you indicated that the production of the repower project would be approximately 60% higher than the current project.
Yes.
And if I'm correct, that the direct correlation there is that I believe you said the current capacity factor for the Suzlon, the existing Suzlon turbines, is approximately 25.7%, and that will rise to approximately 42%.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. How about you, Ms. Duffy? Questions? Mr. Boonstra? Well, round the horn, Mr. Forster? Mr. Pratt?
That 60% increase of production, how does PJM handle that when you have an agreement to put so much in, now that you're going to increase that 60%? How do they physically?
Yeah, so from what I understand, they're concerned about the 240 megawatt sort of peak production. And that is the basis for approval for the interconnection agreement. We do go back to PJM to inform them of the equipment change. But the increase in the actual megawatt hours is not a significant factor from what I understand.
They can't deny you.
No, that's from what I understand, they can't.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes. Just a point of clarification. Currently, it's going into the PGM, the ComEd wholesale market. How does that shift to the commercial industrial? How do you change?
Yeah, so it's a financial contract. It's not physical, so we're not like physically selling them the green electrons. So it's called a virtual power purchase agreement, and that basically it is set against reference hub. In this case would be NIHub, which is Northern Illinois Hub, and ComEd. And then basically we will agree on a price for the power over a certain period of time, which we expect between 10 and 15 years. And it's a financial overlay. We actually sell the power into the PJM marketplace. And let's say our power purchase agreement price is $30 a megawatt hour. If the actual realized price is 35, then we pay the counterparty 5. If the realized price is 25, when we actually sell it into the market, we pay, the counterparty pays us 5. So it's a financial contract that overlays the actual physical sale of the power into the wholesale market. So what it does for the project is it takes away a lot of the power price volatility.
And then just to go back and clarify Mr. Pratt's point, it's not that you are increasing the peak megawatts. It's that you're providing them on a more a steadier basis, a more efficient basis.
Yes,
So that you're getting more hours out of
yes,
the turbines rather than increasing the actual power out of the turbines.
yes.
Okay. That's what I thought was the case, but I just clarifying. That's all I have.
Meyer?
How much more will your end customers pay or a premium for the green electricity?
So the consumer and industrial customers, they actually will look to the wholesale markets and the futures to see where the power is actually trading. It's not that you get a premium. They're not paying really much more, frankly. All it does is give us security over 10 to 15 years of a fixed price. So the C&I customers that contract with us are not really paying a premium at all. So the difference is that we don't have the volatility of the wholesale market, which could average 30, but it could go to 15 or it could go to 40. So they're the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world, in addition to the AT&Ts and other large companies that are contracting, they actually see it as economically sound in addition to being green. This is a function of the fact that the cost for wind and solar has come down drastically and is equally and more competitive than fossil fuel alternatives.
Mr. Bothy? I have a couple in there, both non-substantive, just to help me do my job for the ZBA. Is it VTHO Inc. or just VTHO?
It's VTHO,
VTHO, okay.
but VTHO. Yeah.
Which one? Which is the name of the company? VTHO Inc. or VTHO?
VTHO Inc. is the US company.
Okay. And you're employed by them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the other very non-substantive one was either I zoned out or couldn't write fast enough. What does NFC stand for?
Net capacity factor.
Okay, very good. Back around to you, Mr. Stryker.
I have one question along a similar line to yours. Mr. DePass used the term C&I customers. You could just define that.
Commercial and industrial.
Okay, you may step down, thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, you go. For all of you, solemnly swear that the testimony you're about, or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Have a seat. As you know. Did you hit your knee?
Yes.
Oh, at least you didn't scream.
Good evening, Mr. Howell.
Hello.
Your name is called for the record.
Yes, it's Chris Howell, CHRIS HOWELL. I am employed by Burns McDonnell Engineering Company in Kansas City,
And what is your current business residence?
9400 Ward Parkway, Kansas City, Missouri, 64114.
I'm going to approach you and present you with what's been previously marked as Petitioner's Exhibit 1.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So are you familiar with that document?
I am.
Did you have input in the preparation of that document?
Yes, I did. I oversaw the general preparation.
Keep your voice up, remember.
Apologies.
It's hard, I
Every
know.
time.
Am I correct to say you oversaw for Burns McDonnell the preparation of this application?
Correct, yes.
And then you reported to my peer Schneider ultimately?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And relevant to your testimony here this evening, are there any particular portions or exhibits of this application that you're primarily going to be speaking about?
Yes, specifically tonight, I'll be speaking towards the sound study.
All right. And where is that in the application?
I believe it was.
Am I correct?
There we go. Exhibit J. Apologies.
Thank you. And sir, have you brought a presentation that you can?
Yes, I have.
I'm going to approach you and present you with been marked as petitioners, I'm going to mark as petitioners exhibit 14. You can take a second to review that document. And sir, are you familiar with that presentation?
Yes, I am.
Did you prepare the presentation?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. Why don't I turn it over to you now to take the floor?
Sure, thank you. As mentioned, I'll be speaking about sound for the specific project and addressing specifically Lee County tonight.
Swallow that mic.
Yes.
Yeah, bring it closer.
First, I'll give a quick introduction about myself, a quick introduction on acoustics. I'll talk about the sound level criteria that was developed for the project itself, the ambient measurements that were done, predictive modeling that was done, the parameters and inputs that were used, and then the results of that specific study. All right, so as mentioned, I am Chris Howell. I am an elected member of the Institute of Noise Control Engineers. I have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, done postgraduate level acoustics work. As mentioned, elected member of the Institute of Noise Control Engineering, wherein they review your professional and academic career. You have to be recommended by an existing member of the society. I have been doing noise for a little over 19 years, 21 years total of permitting experience. I've done acoustical studies for many different industries, specifically wind power generation, well over 6 gigawatts of wind turbine noise studies across multiple states, and I believe approximately 15 different projects within Illinois specifically. Real brief introduction to my company. We're a fully integrated engineering, construction, and environmental and consulting firm founded in 1898. We have nearly 7,500 employees. I believe it's about 7,800 now. And we're a top-ranked power and transmission and distribution firm in the United States. All right, so acoustics overview. There's a couple different terms that get used when discussing the sound level of something. There's the sound power level and the sound pressure level. Sound power is the physical energy of that source, and sound pressure is the measure of that power at a distance. Essentially, you're capturing the wave. The sound is measured in decibels, and specifically what we hear is considered an A-weighted decibel just because of the frequency response of our ears. And then as mentioned, frequency is the component of the sound that gives it a characteristic. Amplitude is the volume, frequency is the actual characteristic of the sound. And then typically we talk about equivalent sound level. An instantaneous sound level can be any value, but over a certain time period, you give a single value to that. It is essentially the average sound level over that time period. And then there's a couple of rules of thumb to talk about 3 dB, 5 dB, and 10 dB difference. 3 dB difference is when somebody starts to notice a difference. 5 dB is when somebody can clearly understand the differential between two sound levels. And 10 dB is considered typically a perceived doubling of the sound level. All right, so the first thing that we typically do on any type of study, and specifically one like this, we start at the federal level, see if there are any federal criteria that would be applicable to the project. In this specific instance, EPA does not specifically regulate wind turbine noise. They have delegated that authority down to the state and county levels, and even further in some instances. In Illinois, the Illinois Pollution Control Board does regulate sound specifically. You can see Title 35, Subtitle H. They have very specific noise criteria that they have defined through a series of actions throughout the past, wherein they now have very detailed criteria. And then we go one step further and look at the local, the county, and if there's a township involved. And in this instance, Lee County does have a code that requires a wind energy system to meet the IPCB regulations. So the overall overriding criteria for this type of project would then be the IPCB regulations. The IPCB specifically regulates sound for land use classifications. And the turbine is considered to be an industrial type source. So that land use is considered a Class C land. Agricultural land also happens to be a Class C land. And there is no noise limit for Class C to Class C type areas. So what the IPCB does is when you hit a residence, that then becomes a Class A land. So in our instance here, the project would be limited to a Class C to Class A limit. And for this type of effort, we look at each of the individual octave frequencies, and we look at the nighttime limit as the overriding limit, since it's lower than the daytime limit, as our driving criteria for the project. You can see the specific values that are given there in decibels for each of the 9 frequencies. All right, so the next step that we would do in a study, and for this particular one, because there's been multiple iterations, we didn't redo the ambient sound survey. There has not been significant development in the area. There has not been a large source move in next to one of the wind turbines that would change the ambient survey that was done previously. So we would expect the existing sound levels that were measured to be pretty similar to what they were in 2018. Took 4 different time periods: morning, noon, evening, and midnight, and 15-minute measurements at 13 different locations. So we took a bunch of measurements and kind of came up with an overall picture of what the sound levels are existing in the area. And as you can see there's a value there that says L90. That's the sound level that is exceeded 90% of the time, which is what Illinois uses as the ambient sound level. And sound levels ranged between 36 and 49 dBA at any given time. And then the existing sounds in the areas obviously were wind turbines when they were operating, if we were near enough to one, trains, planes, insects and wildlife, and things like that. The wind itself was actually quite noisy at some points. This next figure is really hard to discern what's going on there. Yellow are individual wind turbines that exist. There are some measurement points called out on the figure. All of this is in the actual exhibit that's in the application. It's much easier to see in there than it is here. The 13 measurement points are distributed throughout the wind farm there to capture sound near roads, near houses, things like that, to get a good picture of the overall ambient. All right, so then the next step that we take is we would do predictive modeling. Specifically, we use a model called CADNA-A. It's a scaled 3-dimensional model that takes into account a lot of different things. It's based on ISO standards, 9613-2 specifically, which is the standard method of predicting sound from industrial sources like this. It's pretty much the industry accepted software and algorithms to use. It assesses sound pressure levels based on octave bands. So it enables us to look at each of the individual frequencies that Illinois regulates. And then we looked out to 3 kilometers from the farthest out turbine. So we would capture any residences or other sensitive areas that would be impacted by the turbines. All right, so then the parameters and inputs that we used. There were 110 turbines included in the analysis. I understand that they're only building 100 or only keeping 109 of the turbines. It was a mixture of V110s and V120s. The terrain was included in the model, 10-foot contours from the USGS, and there were 273 receptors included in the model. I understand now that some of those particular receptors that were included in the model aren't necessarily residences, but they were included anyway. So what is in our analysis is going to be an over prediction of what would be out there in real life. And then lastly there, ground attenuation. We assumed the ground was semi-reflective, which is a pretty conservative approach to ground attenuation, especially for farm fields and things like that have soft dirt and some sort of leftover corn or anything like that is definitely going to soften the ground. So semi-reflective surface makes it a pretty conservative approach. All right. Noise modeling was performed for the layout that exists, and then with the 110 turbines that were chosen for moving forward with. Again, it was a mixture of V110s and V120s. The hub height is where typically the sound is generated from, at distance from one of these turbines. It does not matter if you're looking at the tip of the blade or the hub. Sound is essentially going to look like a point in space when you're this far away from them, because the turbines are not allowed to be built close to a residence. It doesn't matter if you're looking at a disk or a single point in space. It's far enough away that it's essentially the same thing. And then the sound power level of the units was provided to us by Vestas. They use a method called IEC 61400 to determine these sound levels that they estimate these turbines will never exceed under maximum wind loads. We used, the worst case sound level for each octave band. So maybe 8 meters per second or 10 meters per second or 4 meters per second. A specific frequency was louder than the others. Because Illinois looks at each of those individually instead of aggregating them, we use the worst case one moving forward with the analysis. Uncertainty is added to each of the turbines. You can see there it's a 0.8 decibels. IEC specifically calls out that this should be added for a variation during manufacturing of individual turbines. They can't replicate them exactly every time. They think it's about a 0.8 difference between turbines. And then all turbines were considered to be operating simultaneously at maximum sound levels, which again is a pretty conservative approach. All right, so then the conservative assumptions that were made, just to kind of recap them here, the model assumes that atmospheric conditions are favorable for sound propagation. It assumes that there's no vegetation in the area and no stands of trees, anything like that. Maximum sound propagation and worst case directivity factors. So it's assuming that any time a sound wave can reflect off something and head towards a receptor, it does. That's not always the case, but that's the way the algorithm treats it, so that it creates maximum sound level predictions. The model includes what's called a ground-based moderate temperature inversion, which basically doesn't allow the sound to escape to the atmosphere. Sound's going to radiate in all directions, but if you have a low ceiling, the sound can actually hit it and travel further downwind than you would typically expect. So the model assumes that that's occurring right now. Again, we used the worst case sound level for each octave band, included the uncertainty factors, all turbines operating simultaneously, and then assumed the semi-reflective ground surface. Another thing to note here that I put on the next slide specifically is that the model assumes every single receptor is downwind of every turbine. So if you have a receptor but that's between two turbines, it's actually assuming that the wind is blowing from both directions, which is a physical improbability, if not impossibility, that the model assumes something like that. So again, another instance of potential over predictions that are included here. So all of the identified receivers were predicted values, or were given predicted values. It was the logarithmic addition of each individual wind turbine. So if one wind turbine's impact was 35 and another turbine's impact was 35, adding those two together, you're going to have a total of 38. Because it's not straight addition, it's logarithmic addition. And then for just quickly looking at the results, 1,000 hertz is typically going to tell you if you're going to comply or not in Illinois, based on the physical characteristics of the way these generate sound and the way they regulate sound in Illinois. 1,000 hertz is typically what triggers first. So that's the fastest way for us to look at it, is the 1,000 hertz. But we do go ahead and analyze all of the other individual frequencies as well. So I do believe there were exceedances in the initial model that we looked at. just like there have been on the previous iterations of this. However, noise waivers are being sought for the individual landowners, and I know that the applicant is researching their options at this point to determine how to remove these exceedances from the overall project itself, and fully intend to comply with the IPCB regulations before they're done with the application here. And in all likelihood, that is a probability. It does not appear that that's going to be a problem. And so then from there, we predict contours over a gridded area. You can kind of see the light blue line there. That is the 1,000 hertz, 41 decibel limit. And you can see the turbines are yellow. The green little boxes are houses that are participating. And then there are a few non-participating residences within that blue line. That is where the waivers and things like that are being sought. I believe that's all I have at this point.
I'm sorry.
I believe that's all I have at this point.
All right. Follow up.
Yes, Judge, thank you. Mr. Howell?
Yes.
In your presentation, you talked about the developers currently looking at options.
Mm-hmm.
Those be options or to mitigate noise?
But potentially, obviously you want people to participate in the project first. And if that is not an option, there are physical ways to manipulate the sound of the turbine, whether it's derating it or some other form of mechanical fix to the turbine itself. You can reduce those sound levels below the IPCB regulations. I believe so. That would be the most agreeable to everybody. Correct.
A couple questions about the application. Is your current curriculum VTHO included in the application?
I believe it's slightly out of date, but yes, a CV for me is included, yes.
But I think that you testified previously that you have worked on a lot of noise studies for wind farms.
Yes, I have.
How many overall?
It's in excess of 15, specifically in Illinois.
You also mentioned a background study that was done, am I correct, in November 2018?
Correct.
Can you talk to the board members about what the inputs to that background study are? How do you put one of those together?
So the background study is a physical measurement of the current environment out there. We actually have ANSI type 1 noise meters that we use, and we will go out and we will set up in different locations and take measurements of not just the operating turbines that are out there now, but everything that's going on. Just take an acoustical snapshot of what's out there essentially. There will be daytime and nighttime, all of that kind of stuff to come up with overall values for the area.
Is this an in-person study? Is it a computer simulation? Is it a combination of both?
No, that's an all in-person study.
Talk about the crew that goes out there. Do they set up microphones? How does it work?
Yeah, so they will set up microphones. In this instance, there were 13 different locations. They moved around throughout the day and night. So there would have been 13 times 4 different measurements taken. 15 minutes at each measurement location. Basically come up with an aggregated hour at each location over the day, essentially. Correct, yes. It's IPCB has specific guidance on how to take these, and it would have followed that protocol.
And approximately how long does it take to put one of those background studies together?
So the background studies don't take all that long to physically measure the sound levels. It's actually culling through the data afterwards that takes a little while. It'll take about a week to 2 weeks to fully capture that acoustical snapshot of the area.
Are there any standards that govern how that snapshot is taken?
Yes, so the IPCB has guidance in, I believe it's subchapter H, section 900 and 901. They have guidance on how to take ambient measurements. For an instance, with a source like this, there is not in their guidance. What we did was we tried to take measurements in locations either where there were sensitive noise receptors or areas of interest. Typically it would be nearest to residences is where we would have taken measurements, because that's who's most affected by something like this, right? So tried to capture what they experience currently. Correct. It's my impression that there has not been a significant new noise source in the area near these specific residences where we had taken measurements in the past. So the acoustical environment should be fairly similar. Correct. For the modeling study, yes.
And I think you mentioned, sounded like most of your modeling was done on essentially a worst case scenario.
Yes, a significant amount of conservative assumptions go into it.
So you took input from the manufacturer and you combined that against the background report.
So no, so the modeled values are actually compared against the IPCB limits themselves. A comparison of the modeling values to the measured values was not specifically included in the report. It was more for informational purposes of a comparison of existing to future potentially.
I think you mentioned that since we modeled worst case, you would expect that the actual sound emission from the power project would be lower than this.
Yes, it wouldn't behoove the applicant or me to underpredict sound levels significantly. So what I would expect if we were to go out there and measure would be at or less than the values that we have, and likely less.
And as far as the worst case study, I think your conditions good, terrain conditions,
Correct. So for terrain, it wasn't necessarily a worst case. We assumed ground absorption was much less than it likely is in reality, which would dampen sound level. Snow has a very high dampening effect. Ice has a very low dampening effect. We assumed essentially halfway in between there. I would expect the ground of a farm field or something like that to be higher than half. That would help as well. Yes, it would help scatter the sound waves as they hit the crops.
Crops scatter the sound waves in the summer, snow would dampen the sound waves in the winter.
Correct.
So if I correct, Exhibit J is dated April 2nd, 2021, same as the application.
Yes. Correct.
Okay, Mr. Boonstra? Mr. Duffy? Mr. Forster? Mr. Pratt?
You, in your report, you said you used 9 conservative.
Yeah, and then the downwind is an additional one that was not included in that specific list.
So if you ever went back and so you did your model based on conservative inputs, if we went back and found out what that conservative input equate to percentage-wise?
Not percentage-wise. We've done some sensitivity analyses on the model in the past. It can make a couple of decibels differential depending on which specific item it is. If you were to add them all up, I wouldn't expect it to be more than 2 or 3 decibels, but it potentially an individual one could be about that on its own. Without doing the math, sure. And again, a 3 dB differential is required before there's a noticeable change between 2 sound levels. So I would expect any of those conservative factors to add up to barely a perceivable difference.
So then you talk about try to be obtained. Are they different than what different people involved, different residents involved in the present project?
You would have to ask the applicant about that. I believe most everybody is participating, but I do not know that specific answer.
Do we know who
They're keeping a list of it, so I'd have to defer to the applicant for that.
Mr. Hughes?
Actually, that last point that Mr. Pratt touched on, yeah, that covers it.
All right.
Do you know how many less waivers there may be with the Vesta turbines compared to the Suzlon ones?
So I think that's the same question. I apologize. I don't know a difference. I don't know who currently has waivers for the Suzlons.
Mr. Bothi? Is it true that after your modeling study, 18 participating landowners, residents received exceedances and 14 non-participating residents received exceedance?
So the study showed 16 non-participating residences with exceedances, but I believe a couple of those were not actually residences. One was actually a pile of dirt in a field, and one was a cell tower.
So it's 14 non-participating residents
I believe so, yes.
and 18 participating landowner residents.
I don't have the actual number, but that sounds correct, yes.
Okay. Is that in the whole of the project, or is that in Lee County only?
That's in Lee County only.
Okay. Based on my question, back to you, Mr. Sturgeon, or anybody else's question.
Mr. Howell, we're talking about the repowering of the Big Sky project, correct?
Correct.
The fact that we're in a repowering context where you know the exact location of the turbine, help you create a more accurate study.
Yes, it does. There are always construction considerations for a project on a green field. When you get out there, you may need to move it a certain amount of distance to avoid, a subsurface structure that you didn't know about, or something like that. And in doing so, that changes the predictions slightly from the upfront study. For a study like this, where they're using the existing towers, the existing foundations, all of that, we won't see a shift from where we currently are. So I would expect that what we predicted at this point is the worst case impact.
You may step down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's, it's a little early, but let's take a break. Well, that clock's not very accurate. I've got 2 minutes before 8. Let's just say 5 after. Off the record. missing a lawyer.
Oh, Steiger missing?
MIA.
He went home. Probably all of these.
Yeah.
We're down at the basil tree having our.
Well, Terry, why don't you come on up and I'll swear you in, and then we'll make Mr. Stryker feel guilty when he's. I'm kidding you. We're off the record. Okay, on the record. Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Please state your name and spell it correctly.
Sure. Terry Vandewaal, TerryVan, capital DE, capital WALLE. I'm employed as a principal biologist with Stantec Consulting Services. 2300 Swan Lake Boulevard, Suite 202, Independence, Iowa, 50644.
Well, I'm going to approach you with what's been previously marked as Exhibit 1. Start with the current application in this matter. Sir, are you familiar with that document?
Yes,
And did you or your firm prepare any reports that are associated with that?
Yeah.
application?
yes.
Okay, and which ones specifically?
The site characterization report and a bird and bat conservation strategy.
All right, site characterization report marked as Exhibit F.
Yes,
Okay, and it's bird and bat conservation strategy marked as Exhibit H for that report.
yes, yes.
And were both of those reports prepared under your supervision?
Yes, they were.
And sir, have you brought a presentation with you this evening to make your report?
Yes, I have.
And sir, I'm going to approach you with what I'm going to mark as Petitioner's Exhibit 15. Sir, are you familiar with that document?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Is that the presentation you plan to give this evening?
Yes,
And was that prepared by you?
yes, it was.
And I'm going to present you with two more documents, Mr. Vanderwall. These have been previously marked as Petitioner's Exhibit 9, Petitioner's Exhibit 10. Exhibit 9 is a letter, I believe, authored by you to Ms. Duffy, dated March 11, 2019. And the second is a letter from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources to Ms. Duffy, dated April 16, 2021. Give me a second to review those documents. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And we can put those aside for a moment. I may come back to you with questions on those, but why don't I turn it over to you right now for your presentation?
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all again. Just to start with a little bit, we'll start with a little, I guess, my qualifications, a little bit about Stantec, and then we'll kind of get into talking about the studies that we did. I do have a bachelor's degree in animal ecology and a master's degree in biology. I do currently manage Stantec's Independence, Iowa office, and our office is primarily a renewables office. And so we do work on primarily wind farms, but also solar. And then we do a few other things, some road projects and transmission lines and pipelines, things like that, but primarily wind. I've been working as an environmental consultant for around 27 years now, the last 14 years, primarily or principally in the renewables field, working on wind projects really all across the country. I have either conducted or supervised pre and post-construction surveys and studies at wind farms, and then also permitting at wind farms at really almost now 160 wind farms in 22 states, and 35 of those wind farms here in Illinois. Stantec is a large international environmental and engineering firm. We have offices really across, or really around the world, 22,000 employees, over 250 offices here in North America, and around 3,900 environmental and engineering staff here in North America. 250 of those our environmental staff are located here in our Midwest group. In the last few years, Stantec has done environmental and engineering at around 400 wind farms. In the last 10 years, we've worked on around 1,200 wind farms, principally in North America. And the engineer or the Independence Iowa office that I manage, again, is primarily a renewables office, and we're recognized as one of Stantec's renewables hubs. Well, we've been, I and my staff have been working on the Big Sky, at least on this sort of current version of Big Sky, since 2018. I actually worked on the original Big Sky project back in 2008. But on the repower, we started working on it in 2018, and we really began with, that's when the consultation with the Illinois DNR began by submission of the EcoCat request. The EcoCat is the Illinois DNR's online system for obtaining records of threatened or endangered, state-listed threatened or endangered species in the project area. So you submit through the website, you submit a boundary for the project area, and then the system tells you any known records for threatened or endangered species within certain buffers of the project area. So we did that first in December of 2018, and then we get sort of an immediate answer on what those species are, but ultimately what that results in is a letter, a consultation letter that comes to the county from the Illinois DNR, and we'll come back and talk about that here in a few minutes. But we submitted the original boundary back in December of 2018. It was revised back in December of 2018 then, and again, that was for a previous owner of the project. At that time, as part of that, we did realize, or we recognized, that there were some concerns with some state-listed species, specifically two turtles, that we'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes. But as part of that, we did my company did a threatened and endangered species risk assessment. We discussed that with the Illinois DNR, and as a result of that, it was determined that a state incidental take permit would be needed for the project for the two turtle species. And so in 2019, then we did prepare that the conservation plan, submitted that to the DNR, and then that conservation plan, along with the incidental take authorization application, went out on public notice, and that public notice resulted in no comments. We didn't get any comments back at the time, and we were ready to move forward, or the state was ready to move forward with issuing of the permit. That then sort of got delayed through some of the ownership changes in the project. But we have reinitiated that now, and we've met with the Illinois DNR. As you can see on the slide, we met with them in March. Well, actually, let me step back. The EcoCat letters are only good for 2 years, those consultation letters. So we had to redo the consultation through EcoCat. And so that was done in March of this year. And so there was a new EcoCat consultation letter that was issued on March 16th of 2021. We then met with the Illinois DNR to discuss to introduce the new owner of the project, discussed the changes that took place, primarily that there would be fewer turbines decommissioned now, and asked the Illinois DNR whether there were any issues then with that incidental take conservation or the incidental take authorization application that was out there. In other words, or specifically, did it have to go back out on public notice? The answer from the Illinois DNR was no, it did not. So we revised the conservation plan and just submitted the final conservation plan last week to the Illinois DNR, and at which time the DNR indicated that they would process the application and are looking to issue the permit either in June or July of this year. So consultation has been ongoing on this project for the last few years, and again in just in the last couple of weeks. The studies that we did, the primary study we did was a site characterization report. We originally did this work back for the original, for the original owner, but nothing has really changed with project boundaries specifically. So the report we did back then still is valid today. That site characterization report was done based on the Fish and Wildlife Services land-based wind energy guidelines, which does recommend a tiered approach to the studies. And so this slide talks about the 3 tiers that we follow. Tier 1 really is a kind of a large landscape approach. We look at where does the project site fit into the larger landscape, and in particular, what's land cover in the area? Are there any sensitive areas for wildlife say in the county, so in Lee County, or sometimes on a statewide basis? Tier 2 kind of drills down more to the site. Now we're going to look at the specific site. What's the land cover on the site? Is there specific wildlife habitat on the site? Any areas that might attract wildlife? And it's really at this tier 2 phase that the EcoCat comes into play, because EcoCat is looking at what threatened or endangered species are known from the area of the project site. And then tier 3 studies would be any field studies that were done. We haven't done any field studies, any wildlife field studies for this site. There are some additional tiers in the land-based wind energy guidelines, but those are all post-construction, and so don't apply yet at this stage. So taking just a quick look at the site, at land cover at the site, and again, we look at the land cover to get an idea of where, are there any attractants for wildlife, specific wildlife habitat? And probably not a surprise to you all, but this site is primarily agricultural. Around 87% of the project area is cropped. And what that tells us is that there's not really a lot of natural habitat out there for wildlife, or habitats to attract wildlife. There is a little bit of forest, a little bit of woodland, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. And very little wetland. In fact, if we go to the next slide, the other thing we look at is the National Wetlands Inventory. And the National Wetlands Inventory is a publicly available database that gives us an idea of where wetlands are. And for our purposes, the reason we look at wetlands is, again, as an attractant for wildlife. And what you'll see here is that very little wetland within the project area. Again, mostly cropped, not a lot of marshes or ponds or other attractant that might attract birds in particular. So what we know from the site from this phase of it is there's very little wildlife habitat out there. The land-based wind energy guidelines do look at what they call species of concern. And in some cases, these are groups like migratory birds. So migratory birds are birds that might be here in the summer, but fly south in the winter. So a lot of these are things that you're familiar with: cardinals and robins, those types of birds. Some of the hawks do that as well. So what we know is that because there's very little wildlife habitat on the project area or within the project area, there's very little habitat for these migratory birds. Migratory birds, we're really looking at stopover habitat, right? They're going to be going from one place, whether that's here or it's farther north from here, and flying south for the winter. And so we're looking at, when we look for wildlife habitat, is there any stopover habitat? That would be those wetlands, it would be woodlands, things like that. So what we know is that there are limited streams, riparian corridors, those are natural corridors along streams, for instance. Very little, of those riparian corridors, woodlands within the project area, and as we said, very little wetland as well. Cultivated crops provide really no nesting habitat for birds, so there's no breeding bird concerns within those wildlife or within the cropped areas, and they don't provide a lot of stopover habitat for most migratory birds anyway. We did look at some other publicly available information regarding the bird species that might be out there. One of those is the breeding bird survey. Breeding bird surveys are conducted annually, typically in June. And these are standardized routes that somebody goes out and they look at birds. They record the birds that they see every year at the same locations. And so if we looked at the breeding bird survey data that's been collected in the area since 1966, in this case, what we see is that the bird species that you see on the list are all, again, very common species we would expect to see really in these Midwestern agricultural areas. So again, things like robins, a number of the sparrows, barn swallows, cowbirds, house sparrows, which are non-native, mourning doves, cardinals. So I'm sure a lot of the birds that you all see around here quite commonly. If you feed birds, you're going to see a lot of these birds, even in your backyards. Eagles are another species of concern. The land-based wind energy guidelines that look at eagles are, although they're not threatened or endangered, federally threatened or endangered anymore, they are still protected under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. They are a special concern species here in Illinois, and so the Illinois DNR doesn't track these, so you won't see anything related to eagles come up on the EcoCat report because they're not currently state listed. Really, again, not a lot of what we would think of as typical eagle habitat within the project area. No large rivers, no large lakes. There is some woodland, which potentially could provide nesting habitat, but we don't have a lot of those water aquatic sources or water sources to provide food in the area. So again, we didn't do any field surveys. We looked at publicly available data. We looked at Christmas bird counts. These are counts that are conducted through the Audubon Society called Christmas bird counts because they're typically done on Christmas Day. And groups of volunteers go out to the same points every year, look within a certain radius of that point and count the birds every year on Christmas Day. And what you can see on the slide is that during those counts, there have been eagles observed, right, during the winter months. And again, not a surprise, eagles migrate. They come through here in the spring and in the fall, and some travel through from the winter. Some may stay the winter, depending on the winter, how severe the winter is. So not a surprise to see them, during the winter months, but not a lot of eagle activity based on the data that, publicly available data that we have. The other group are the other birds of prey or the other raptors, the hawks, owls, falcons, things like that. Again, if you look at the list from either breeding bird surveys or Christmas bird counts, these are all common species that we would expect. Red-tailed hawks, great horned owls, barred owls, American kestrels. These are all pretty common things that we would see around here. The project, when it was originally constructed and as part of the repower, has already taken some measures to minimize the collision risk to birds. The turbines themselves are self-supporting. There's no guy wires. It is the guy wires that are really the concern, whether that's related to a cell tower or if it were some other communications towers. It's the guy wires that are often the problem. In this case, there are no guy wires on the turbines. Less of a concern of just birds running into the towers. All the collection and communication lines are buried, which avoids, again, birds running into those, also avoids electrocution risks, things like that. The project substation, the substation lights are downshielded, and the employees are instructed to turn down the lights associated with the insides of the turbines. The concern with the lights is that at night, when it's a foggy night or there's a low cloud ceiling, if there's a light that the birds can see, the birds home in on those lights. So as they're flying over at night, they're migrating through. If they see a light, they may head towards the light, and when they head towards the light, they have to pass through the rotor swept zone of the turbines, and they're more at risk. So by downshielding the lights, turning off lights that are not needed, you can reduce the risk to the birds. And so the project, again, has been, to my knowledge, already implementing that, and will be during after the repower. And then personnel that work at the project, the O&M personnel, the operations and maintenance personnel, will receive periodic environmental awareness training and be instructed to note any wildlife mortality that they might see. Threatened and endangered species. So again, some of this information comes from the EcoCat report. Some of it comes from other online databases that we searched through the Fish and Wildlife Service, for instance. So there are records of a number of threatened and endangered species in the area. The two turtles, ornate box turtles, and Blanding's turtles. There's a butterfly, the regal fritillary, and then a number of plants as well. Again, because this project area is primarily cropped, there's really no habitat for the plants in the area, and so the plants are not a concern. Regal fritillaries need violets. That's their host plant. And again, because of really the predominance of agriculture, violets are not going to be commonly found in the area either, particularly in the areas where the repowering activities are going to take place. So the butterfly is not a concern either. So what we're left with then are the two turtles, which we identified early on as the two species that could potentially be at risk. There is highly suitable habitat for both the box turtle and the Blanding's turtle at the Ryan wetland and sand prairie. That site, actually, if we go to the next slide, we can look at the map. The Ryan wetland and sand prairie is actually right in the middle of the project area. And that's a known site for the Blanding's turtles and the ornate box turtle as well. So what we did is, we looked at, we know that the turtles are there. We looked at of the turbines within the project area, what, if any of those would be risky for the turtles. And so we did the threatened and endangered species risk assessment. And what we identified is that there are 22 turbines located within a mile of the Ryan and wetland and sand prairie. And then there were 2 additional turtles that were located in close proximity to a known occurrence of the turtles. Of those 22 turbines that we considered to be potentially risky, there were 14 of those that were then identified as posing a risk during construction to the 2 turtle species. And so what you're looking at on the screen or in your handout is the Ryan wetland and sand prairie. The black and white dashed line is the 1 mile buffer of the sand prairie. And then those turbines, the 22 turbines within that, again, 14 of those are the ones that are considered to be risky. So there were some specific conservation measures then that were developed in order to avoid or minimize risk to the 2 turtle species. Specifically, those include that during construction, at those 14 turbines that were considered risky, exclusion fencing will be installed around the construction area. So in this case, it's going to be silt fence. The exclusion fence is put up around the perimeter of the construction area that prevents turtles from getting into the area while construction is occurring. Right after the silt fence is installed, a biomonitor will go in and inspect the area. If there are any turtles caught on the inside, the turtles will just be picked up and moved to the outside. So in this way, we can keep turtles out of the construction area while construction activities are occurring. The fence will be visually inspected by the monitor during construction. While during any collector line upgrades or along the crane walk. So as the cranes are moving from one site to another, the biomonitor will essentially walk ahead of that equipment and make sure that there are no turtles in front of it. So the turtles are not, run over by the equipment as it's moving around. And then periodically, the biomonitor during construction will be inspecting crane or access roads and in other areas, again, making sure the turtles are sort of out of harm's way as equipment is moving along. These are the conservation measures that Stantec developed as part of the threatened and endangered species risk assessment, and these are the conservation measures that we've discussed with the Illinois DNR as part of the incidental take authorization. There are two state and federally listed bat species that occur in the project area, or at least whose ranges include the project area. That's the Indiana bat and the northern long-eared bats. We did a habitat assessment for the bats. These bats are both migratory. Indiana bats are a long-distance migrator, and northern long-eared bats are a shorter distance migrator, but they both go somewhere else to hibernate. But during the winter, the females come up to these areas, say in Illinois, and this is where they form their maternity colonies. So the females come up here, they get under the bark of dead and dying trees, and that's where they have their pups. And a number of these females will all congregate together at one tree. Those are the maternity colonies that they form. So the way that we then do a habitat assessment is we look for the woodlands. And we see if there are any suitable woodlands for the bats. And so that's what you see on the screen now. We did do a habitat assessment, kind of the teal color are the woodlands that meet the criteria as suitable bat summer habitat. So you'll see there is some habitat within the project area. But again, this is an existing project, so the turbines are already there. And at least a number of those turbines are located a distance from from suitable habitat. And so by siting turbines 1,000 feet or more from suitable habitat, you can avoid the risk to the bats. And so we'll talk more about that here in a second. So we do know, I think most people know that bats are susceptible to being to rotor strikes. So as the bats are flying around, they fly through that rotor swept zone and they can get hit by the turbine blades. And we also know that there's this inverse relationship between bat activity and wind speed. So as wind speed goes up, bat activity goes down. And the reason for that is that the bats are very small. They only weigh maybe as much as say a quarter would weigh. So really small, don't weigh a lot. So on a high wind speed night, they have trouble flying. In addition, they eat insects, and those insects have trouble flying on high wind speed nights as well. So the bats and their food are not out when the wind speeds are high. So what we know is that by raising the cut-in speed of the turbine, so the cut-in speed is the wind speed at which the blades begin spinning and generating power. By raising that so that they don't start spinning until a higher wind speed, we can reduce bat mortality. So, there are many studies that have shown that. The Illinois DNR understands that, and the Fish and Wildlife Service understands that as well. So the primary conservation measure that the project is going to adopt is raising the cut-in speed from the manufacturer's cut-in speed to 5 meters per second. And so the project will raise the cut-in speeds to 5 meters per second during the fall season. That's the season of the highest risk for the bats. So from April 1st through July 31st, so prior to fall, the project will raise cut-in speeds to 5 meters per second at those turbines that are within 1,000 feet. So remember, turbines more than 1,000 feet from woodlands don't pose risk to the bats. So any turbines that are within 1,000 feet prior to fall will have its cut-in speed raised to 5 meters per second. Those turbines that are more than 1,000 feet from woodlands, the project will feather the blades below the cut-in speed. What we know is that if you just simply feathering the blades, so turning the blades, pitching the blades sort of into the wind so that they're not freewheeling, right? So when the project's not generating power, those blades are not just kind of pinwheeling. Turn the blades so they turn very slowly. Just simply by doing that, you can reduce overall bat mortality by about 35%. So during the non-fall season, again, turbines within 1,000 feet will have their cut-in speed raised to 5. Those outside will be feathered below. During the fall season then, so from August 1 through October 15th, turbine or cut-in speed will be raised at all turbines during that time frame. So during the period of highest risk, cut-in speed will be raised at all turbines. What we know is that raising cut-in speeds to 5 meters per second can reduce overall bat mortality by anywhere from 47 to 87%. And the Illinois DNR considers a cut-in speed of 5 meters per second to be avoidance of risk. Okay, well, we'll just kind of quickly step through the consultation letter, the recommendations. So if you recall, we originally did the EcoCat letter back in 2018. At that time, the Illinois DNR issued some recommendations. We had to resubmit that and redo it here in 2021. And so we have a new letter then that's dated the April 16, 2021 letter. I'll just note that the recommendations in the 2021 letter are exactly the same recommendations that were in the 2018 letter. The Illinois DNR did not have any additional or change their recommendations. So just kind of step through these. The first recommendation is that the DNR recommends that the county require 3 years of post-construction mortality monitoring to do a statistical study to look at what bats are being killed at the project. These post-construction mortality surveys are simply having people walk underneath the turbines and look for dead birds and bats. We record those, and there are some statistical sort of correction factors that we use to estimate then how many bats in particular are killed. So Big Sky does agree to comply with this recommendation, and as such, we'll conduct 3 fall seasons of post-construction monitoring. During that time, there'll be these standardized searches where we look under the turbines. Those bias correction factors that we use, those things that increase the precision of our estimate, include searcher efficiency trials and carcass persistence trials. So these are all standard methods and the methods that the Illinois DNR and Fish and Wildlife Service recommend that we use. We are limiting the post-construction monitoring to the fall because, again, that is the season of highest risk. Big Sky will maintain records, of course, and at the end of each monitoring season, a report will be prepared, and the monitoring report will be prepared, submitted to both the county and the DNR. If at some point during the monitoring, the project finds a state listed bat, Big Sky will coordinate with the Fish and Wildlife or with the Illinois DNR and pursue an incidental take permit at that time. Recommendations 2 and 3 are really sort of coupled with each other. The department, recommends that the county consider requiring the applicant to curtail the wind turbines to 5 meters per second. As I mentioned earlier, the project is agreeing to do that. The turbines will be curtailed. Some of the turbines within 1,000 feet during the summer, all turbines during the fall. And then recommendation 3 is that the department recommends that the county consider requiring the applicant to feather turbine blades when not in operation. So that is that feathering below the manufacturer's cut-in speed that I mentioned earlier. So, outside of the period of risk from April 1st through July 31st, all turbines that are not feathered at 5 will be feathered below the manufacturers. So the project's complying with both recommendations 2 and 3. Recommendation 4 really is just saying that if the project doesn't raise cut-in speeds to 5, then the DNR recommends an incidental take authorization. But in this case, the project is raising cut-in speeds to 5, and so it is following really recommendations 1, 2, and 3. Recommendation 5 then is related to the turtles and recommends that the avoidance and minimization measures that were discussed in the technical memorandum prepared by Stantec in February of 2019 be implemented. Again, as I mentioned earlier, all of those are being implemented. So that's the exclusion fence around the construction areas, the biomonitor who will be there to monitor during construction. And recommendation 6 then is related to an incidental take permit for the turtles. Again, recommending that an incidental take be sought for those turtles. As I mentioned, that's already in the works. The conservation plan has already been approved, gone out in public notice, received no public comments, and we just submitted the final plan last week. Illinois DNR has indicated that they anticipate to issue the permit then in June or July of this year. And then just lastly, the last recommendation relates to another species, a snake, the Plains hognose snake. The DNR, is recommending an incidental take authorization for the Plains hognose snake, but the project did consider that, but there are no records of the Plains hognose snake in the vicinity of the project. The DNR acknowledges that. And in addition, there's very little hognose snake habitat within the project area, and the conservation measures that are being implemented for the 2 turtles, again, the exclusion fence, the biomonitor, things like that, are all the same conservation measures that you would use for the snake. So, it's felt that those measures are sufficient for protecting the snake, and so at this time, the project is not pursuing an incidental take permit for the snake. However, if sometime during the life of the project, it's determined that an incidental take permit or authorization is needed for the turtles, the project will pursue one. And that's it.
If I could turn your attention back to recommendation 6. That's the slide participation, but second to last one.
Yep, sure.
And recommendation 6, if I'm quoting accurately, it says, "Be advised, it is unlawful to handle or move any listed animals without an incidental take authorization or valid research permit, as appropriate." Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And if you could describe to the members, incidental take permit sort of implies that you might kill one by accident, but actually you may need to take permit to remove or save a turtle if it's perhaps in the path of the truck. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Killing an animal, or it could be picking it up and just simply moving it somewhere else. Under the state would consider all of those things to be take. And then there's, take that would be where would be the intent of your activity would be to take an animal. So if I were to go out and just take my gun out and shoot a bat, if I could do that, shoot an Indiana bat, that would be take where I intended to go out and do it. But then the other type of take is this incidental take, where it's take that is incidental to an otherwise lawful activity. That's the permit that's being pursued here. Now, so we need to have that, the project needs to have that incidental take permit, in this case for the turtles, as a way for that incidental take to be legal. Now, if we're doing either the post-construction monitoring or the biomonitors out, trying to move turtles out of the way so they don't get run over, there are separate permits that are needed for that. There's a state threatened and endangered species permit, and there's a state scientific collecting permit. So there's really two permits you need in order to do that. And so whoever the biomonitor is will need to obtain those permits to be able to legally move say a turtle out of the way.
That would be the ultimate intent, right? If the turtle's walking in front of a construction vehicle, that turtle will be moved out of the way.
That's right. Or if it's just inside the construction area. But yeah, that is the intent, and that's what the biomonitor would be doing.
Well, I handed you what's been previously marked as petitioners exhibits 9 and 10.
Yes.
We referred to those why those might develop.
Yeah. So exhibit 9 is a letter that I wrote. I authored back in March of 2019. This was a response to the 2018 EcoCat letter. And this is a letter that essentially walks through each of the recommendations and explaining what the project will do to comply with those. That's actually what we just went through in my testimony. The Exhibit 10 then is the April 16, 2021 EcoCat letter. So the updated EcoCat letter with the same recommendations that were in the 2018 letter.
I think on the header of a number of your slides, you had the April 2021 date, is that correct?
That's correct. To Exhibit 10, correct.
Sir, we previously discussed that Exhibit F to the special use permit application, the site characterization study, and Exhibit H, which is the bird and bat conservation study, were prepared under your supervision, is that correct?
Yes.
And both of those studies, if I'm not mistaken, were updated in March of 2021 for this application?
Yes, they were. They were updated with the new owner's information and any changes to the project that were required, specifically, the number of turbines that would be decommissioned. Well, it's both, really, I guess, right? Because originally, in the original reports we did, I think the project was intending to, the owner at that time was intending to decommission more turbines than are being decommissioned now. So.
Lastly, sir, I know you provided a number of bits of information about your background, but you could just briefly describe your relevant educational history.
Right. So again, I do have a bachelor's degree in animal ecology and a master's degree in biology.
Mr. Boonstra, questions? Ms. Duffy? Mr. Forrester? Mr. Pratt?
Do you have any, do you do any work or consultation with the Ryan wetland?
I did not personally, but I know that, but I think Mike Spearschneider did. So, but I have not personally. No. I did not personally, anyway. No.
Thank you.
I'll pass.
No question. Both of you? You step down. Thank you. Thank you. Right. All right, off the record for a minute, just a little planning, that's all, without putting your feet in cement, Mr. Stryker. And again, I'm not putting your feet in cement, but just, would you guess how many more witnesses?
Yes, I can tell you with pretty good precision. We plan to present a witness on shadow flicker and signal interference. That was with our rep.
Prepared to produce them at our next available date, which would be June 10th,
Yes.
okay?
I would not anticipate that would take much more than an hour.
That doesn't help much, but no, thank you. Moving to June 21st and 22nd, are you, you're out, right, Mr. Forster?
Yes.
Borough isn't here to ask. Are you still in on those two dates, Mr. Bothy?
Yes.
You're out, Mr. Hughes. Mr. Pratt, you're in for those two dates?
What
Yeah,
dates were they again, Judge?
I'm sorry, June 21st and 22nd.
So good.
And you're still good. I was getting to you. Okay. 1, 2. All right. Remind me to ask Mr. Bothy or Mr. Burrow at the next hearing, but without promising anything, I think we can get both the evidence done, and if there's no interested parties with evidence, the findings of fact and recommendation done by the 21st or 22nd. I really do. So, back on the record, we will recess tonight until Thursday, June 10th at, can we do by 6 by then or not, guys? Is that all right? Rex?
He says it's not all right, but.
Well, no, seriously, Rex?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Okay. 6 o'clock, that one. Well, I'll try and remember that. 6 o'clock on the 10th. All right, everybody have a good interim, and we'll see you then.